So here I'm going to be talking about these two authors. I present these in my philosophy of science class, and I've got a sort of a strategy here where I present these not as arguments that I'm encouraging my students to sort of take seriously in the sense that like, oh, these are good arguments that maybe I should really consider whether their conclusions are things that I should believe myself. Instead, I present these as examples of arguments that are not very good arguments. So kind of the exercise here is to spot the flaws in the arguments. So these are kind of polar opposites, these two authors, Paul Feyerabend and Richard Dawkins. So both of these authors were writing at a time when there were very serious court battles over what should be taught in public school science classrooms. Because, of course, the scientists are thinking just straightforward science, just the truth. You know, what science is telling us is the truth, as opposed to others that were trying to get religion brought into public schools in general, and in particular brought into science classes as a rival to evolutionary theory. And the thought was, oh, well, we should present both sides, right? The science side and the religion side, and let students figure out which one they think is more likely to be true or which one they prefer to accept. So there were lots of court battles over that, certainly up through the 80s and even into the 90s. But these authors were writing like in the 70s and 80s. All right. So just as a little bit of background, Thomas Kuhn was famous for this sort of argument where that over time in any particular field of science, scientists are working within a paradigm. That paradigm guides their thinking about their work, about their entire career, everything that they think about in their work as scientists. But eventually, inevitably, some anomalies start to show up in a paradigm and it becomes less and less useful. And so eventually that field of science will potentially reject this old paradigm and move on to a new paradigm. But a worry that Thomas Kuhn had was that since a paradigm kind of defines everything you think about in science, including what counts as good science, is fully defined from within a paradigm, that there might not be any neutral, paradigm-free way to compare rival scientific paradigms, or to compare an old paradigm in a field of science with a new paradigm that's replaced it. There's no direct way to compare those. This is something that Thomas Kuhn was worried about. And if that's true, if it's really the case that there's no way to directly compare two paradigms like this, then when a field of science, a community of scientists move from one paradigm to a new one, from an old paradigm to a new paradigm, there's no way to show that the new paradigm is scientifically better or scientifically closer to the truth than the old paradigm, or in fact, that it's closer to the truth than any other paradigm. If there's no neutral, objective way to compare paradigms, then really all we're doing is switching from one paradigm to another, and we're not kind of marching closer and closer to a true understanding of the world. So when Kuhn published this work, this caused or helped to promote a split in academia that was already there between, roughly speaking, the realists and the constructivists. Constructivists are sometimes called relativists as well. So the realists think, no, there is a way to show that one paradigm is closer to the truth than another paradigm. I've got other videos and stuff on this topic if you want to check that out, but I'll just mention it here that the realists think that, no, science really is getting closer to the truth, whereas the constructivists took this incommensurability of paradigms concern that Kuhn had and said, oh, well, okay, well, there's no way to show that one paradigm is closer to the truth than any other paradigm. So maybe science is not really marching on its way to getting a true and full understanding of nature. And there's no way to show that science itself even is better than any other paradigm, a non-scientific paradigm that you want to accept. And it's really maybe just up to us to decide. There's just no objective truth at all. So embracing kind of full relativism. And this is what Paul Feyerabend embraces in this essay. This essay that he calls Science and Myth. And he's equating the two, right? So we would normally think mythology, it's like, okay, that's interesting, but it's sort of this historical analysis. But science, that's giving us the true understanding. But Feyerabend is suggesting that, well, they're equivalent, really. There's no way to show that science is somehow better or somehow closer to the truth or a better way of gaining true understanding of the world than myth or religion or any other kind of system of thinking that you want to embrace. Okay. Um, so just he speaks very similar, in a way very similar to Kuhn about science and comparing paradigms, as Kuhn called them. But he does believe that the one thing that remains true, regardless of any paradigm, is freedom. Freedom is of ultimate importance. And so we should embrace that attitude. And so people should be free to believe whatever paradigm they want. It shouldn't be up to the scientists, these elites that are, demanding that the rest of society accept the truth that these elite scientists have discovered or somehow constructed for themselves, and they're imposing their belief system on the rest of society. So Feyerabend feels himself to be pushing back against that attitude of the scientists. Another approach that he takes, and this again, I have this elsewhere if you want to look into more detail, is that he claims in his first premise here that scientists claim to be following a deductively sound logical procedure. But there is no deductively sound logical procedure in science. There's no deductively sound procedure to guarantee that scientific conclusions are for sure 100% guaranteed to be true. So therefore, it's just guessing, right? It's just opinion. So it's kind of this somewhat odd attitude of like, either you prove it 100% guaranteed that your beliefs are definitely true, or it's just opinion. Like, yeah, we can just believe whatever we want. Like, those are the only two options. But in any case, this is what he's trying to promote here. Then when it comes to classrooms, he's got this, sort of a legal case. The US Constitution forbids the establishment of a state religion. Okay, that makes sense. That is, it outlaws the teaching of one religion as correct. And since, given sort of what's already been talked about here, he's trying to make the case that scientific beliefs or scientific paradigms, scientific theories, whatever you want to call them, are really no different than religious beliefs because it's just kind of opinion, right? You can't prove either one. So therefore, it's just opinion, and you're just free to believe whatever you want to believe. So he's trying to say then the Constitution must also forbid the teaching of science in public schools, because then that's like the state, the government, promoting science as the true belief. And he's trying to say that that doing that is no different than promoting a particular religion as the true belief. And so it's all outlawed by the First Amendment to the Constitution. So this might seem a little odd. I'm not sure ultimately how seriously Feyerabend was expecting these arguments to be taken, and if like putting these into place in the public school system would create chaos. It's like, what are you supposed to teach students? He's talking about it in terms of science, but it seems like this could be taken also into pretty much every other area of academia. So history classes, social studies classes, any of these things. It's really just about like, oh, what do you want? What do you feel like believing? You should be allowed to believe whatever you want. So that seems like a recipe for chaos, at least, if not outright sort of serious problems being generated by this. For example, if you want to look it up, the Lysenko affair in the Soviet Union followed something like this. For political reasons, the Soviet authorities embraced an alternative view of biology as compared to sort of their rivals in the West, in Europe, in the United States, and elsewhere, that felt like they were in competition as the communist Soviet Union. And so they embraced a different kind of biology that informed their agricultural policies. And since this was something that they embraced for political reasons, not scientific reasons, it turned out to be a miserable failure. There was massive starvation, hundreds of thousands of people dead, and it's pointed to historically as an example of like, well, nature is a certain way. Science is figuring out the way nature is. So you probably should pay more attention to science, even if you don't like it, right? Even if for personal reasons, political reasons, or religious reasons, or whatever it might be, that you disagree with the leading scientific theories, those leading scientific theories are more likely to be true. And so you should probably pay more attention to them. So Feyerabend is just disregarding all of this and just trying to knock science off its pedestal or something, just to decrease its authority or somehow decrease its influence in our society. Here's a few other things that he says. It almost seems like this sometimes, that scientific results are determined by voting. You go to scientific conferences or you pay attention to debates within the scientific community. It's sort of like whatever the majority of scientists in the community thinks seems to be on the right track, thinks that seems to be correct, that's what's accepted as correct. So that sounds like voting, but that's a misrepresentation that he's giving us here. It's not just voting. The reasons that the scientific community comes to an agreement as to what the most likely to be correct answer is based on evidence. And all of the scientific research and the checking and rechecking of all the different alternative possibilities. So all things considered, it seems like, from the point of view of the scientific community, that a certain viewpoint or a certain conclusion is much more likely to be true than the alternatives. So it's not just preference voting. If it's voting at all, it's voting based on what seems most likely to be true, all things considered. So there's that. He complains that scientists try to keep out non-scientists, try to make themselves seem more special or have greater authority somehow by making science seem more complicated than it really is. That's sort of up to you to decide whether it seems more complicated than it really is. Learn some of the scientific theories, and if it turns out that they're far easier than you were told, okay. I don't think that this is the case at all, that it's like science is kind of complicated. Reality of nature is quite complicated and messy. So our scientific theories tend to get pretty complicated when we're trying to dive into all the just gigantic number of details that are going on in any field of science. This one I find particularly interesting. You sometimes hear people talk this way. People that, interestingly, I hear scientists sometimes say things like this, that philosophy, or more particularly in Feyerabend's case, philosophy of science, is useless, right? It doesn't have a single discovery to their credit, he says. So what is Feyerabend doing here? What is this essay? It seems like he's presenting arguments, reasoned arguments. I disagree with the arguments, but they're arguments in favor of a particular conclusion concerning science. That's philosophy, and not just philosophy, but philosophy of science. And then he's using that to try to somehow conclude that philosophy of science doesn't have a single discovery to their credit, not even his Feyerabend's own discoveries. So that seems odd. So you see this happening sometimes when people use philosophical arguments to try to conclude that philosophical arguments are useless. So that seems self-contradictory. All right. Now, on to Richard Dawkins. Dawkins is a sort of a famous science promoter. He's fairly old now, so he hasn't published anything that sort of made any kind of a splash in the public for a while, but certainly through the 1980s, he was well known as a prominent author promoting scientific literacy and just sort of interest in science, kind of like a Bill Nye or a Neil deGrasse Tyson. So here's here's Dawkins's argument, and he's very pro-science. In fact, he's kind of hearkening back to something like the Enlightenment attitude that science should be our only way of thinking about anything. Science is so reliable, so useful, so much better than any alternative way of thinking that society should completely embrace science and completely reject anything that's not science. So here's his argument. Both science and religion propose explanations for the natural world. Religious explanations fail while the scientific explanations work. They are successful. And further, religion leads to violent conflict where science doesn't. So therefore, science is better, right? Science should be embraced. Religion should actually be eliminated from society for these reasons. That continuing to keep religion as part of society, he thinks, is akin to teaching people that magic is real, this imaginary, hopeful thinking, as opposed to sort of like tough-minded science that really gets to the truth of the matter, as opposed to all these sort of fantasies that he thinks of with religion. So this is not a very good argument either. We can kind of pull apart his premises here. So this idea that religion proposes explanations for the natural world, well, sure, that is a component of lots of religions, but to think that somehow this is what religion does, religion is primarily in the business of explaining the natural world. For some people, maybe that's true, but by and large, that is not the primary focus of religions, world religions, or any other particular religion. There's a lot of moral guidance, there's sort of meaning and purpose in life, there's spirituality and so on. There's all these other things about our humanity that are considered within a religion that is different than just sort of explaining astronomy or something, or biology. Almost all religions have some little bits of that sprinkled in, but that's typically not the primary focus of any religion. So his first premise seems a little off base there, or at least sort of ignoring kind of what religion is really about and focusing in on this one thing where religion tries to make explanations for the natural world in terms of their creation stories or whatnot, that through our modern scientific understanding, we can recognize that those creation stories are very unlikely to be true. Okay. And then this part, right? Religion leads to violent conflicts, that somehow it's religion itself that is promoting violence. And if it wasn't for religion, then we wouldn't have anywhere near as much violence in the world. That seems implausible. Yes, religion is sometimes used as a justification for violence. And there are cases where people get so caught up in their religious beliefs that they just feel like they must fight against anybody who doesn't believe the way they do. Yes, that does happen. But again, to think that that's somehow unique to religion, or somehow there's something special about religion that causes humans to behave this way, and if they just rejected religion or just eliminated religion from our society and our cultures, that attitude would go away, that's just ahistoric, right? That is not accurate, and it's not an accurate understanding of human impulses towards violence in war. So more frequently, it's about resources and territory and politics than it is about religious ideology that's leading to warfare or any other kind of violence. So like I did with Feyerabend, here's a few other things that Dawkins says in his essay. Raising children within a religion is child abuse. And I kind of alluded to this before, that here's why he thinks this, that you're sort of raising children to believe in magic, as he thinks it, and this sort of, as if magic is real, if you could just pray for something, then it will come true. That seems like magical thinking. And so he thinks that that's a disservice, that's mental abuse of your children to raise them with that attitude. Many people would disagree, quite obviously. And again, he's sort of focusing on one narrow aspect of religion and ignoring sort of all the other benefits of it. And then there's this sort of political or legal bit about the battles about what should be taught in public schools. And so people were arguing, as I mentioned before, that maybe religion should be presented in public schools, in particular in public school science classrooms, as a rival to the prominent scientific theories. So he says, well, if religion is included in science classes, then maybe science should be in religion classes. Okay, I'm not sure what to make of that. and that science and religion will never be compatible. Again, this seems to be drawn from his attitude that religion is specifically trying to give us explanations for the natural world that are a direct rival to scientific explanations, and the scientific explanations are always going to win. Well, there are a whole bunch of other areas of thinking that religion influences that isn't about the kinds of things that science is trying to do. So it could very well be that you can be a scientist and sort of understand and have trust in science and the scientific process and scientific conclusions while also being a religious believer. Some people find it surprising to learn that the Vatican and the Pope, so that the center of Catholicism that is sometimes held up as like the strongest opponent to science, is actually completely friendly to science. The official attitude of the Vatican is that in terms of nature and the natural world, science is the way to go. Science is going to give us the best answers there. But in terms of meaning and spirituality, thoughts about the afterlife, community, morality, those things are the realm of religion, according to the Vatican and many other religions too. And so there's a compatibility there, right? That it seems like religion and science can be compatible in that sense. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and stop there. I think that's enough bashing of both Dawkins and Feyerabend for now.